it was one of my most, it was a project that meant so much to me as a creator, because if you like, for anyone that was part of that community that held the ADHD coin, we were all rising together, right? In this idea of that creator economy. And to your point, like I like shunned away from being considered a creator for many, many years, because I looked at a creator and like an artist and a musician, and like I was like, I'm a storyteller and I like to talk and I get on stage, right? Like, and I can create video, but like, and the weird part about that is like that self-labeling. Like if that's where I love, like, I believe every person has a story to tell, and every person has experiences and perspective that no one else has.
Aloha, and welcome to another episode of the Groundswell Podcast, where I connect you outstanding humans and sustainable ideas. I'm your host, Scott Martin. Today we have Brian Fanzo. He's world-renowned as a futurist. He speaks on multiple stages all around the world. He's a prolific creator and somebody who he and I have shared multiple clubhouse rooms together in a former podcast. And we kind of do a deep dive on the origins of his, basically one of the top podcasts in the world around NFTs, called NFT 365, which is recorded and minted an NFT every day for a year. And we just talk about the creator journey. We talk about what the future of blockchain and Web3 as it pertains to creators, and this intersection of values and trust for where things are going in Web3, I'd say just in general business overall, and such a beautiful outlook on where things are going in the future. So if you want to get a peek into the future from someone who knows, not just theoretically, rolls up his sleeves, dives right in consistently, well, Brian Fanzo, this episode is for you. He is going to be somebody that, if you haven't heard of, you need to go look into the catalog of content that he's created. It's pretty spectacular. And if you do, then I guess you're looking forward to it. So let's paddle in with the one and only Brian Fanzo. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, friend. Good to chat again. And I feel like we've been on a roller coaster for many years together. So excited to catch up and have a good conversation today.
Yeah, I mean, we spent hours on Clubhouse together, helping so many people. We had hundreds of people. I think one time we did 9 hours on Clubhouse, and with Brittany Crystal. And
Yep.
we've had so many great conversations. But there was a span of time where you went off into the Web3 NFT world and left me in the dust, because I was like, I don't know, I don't really pay attention to this. I was focused on my book. And then what happened was I was in Gary Vee's 40 program, and I remember he had a early look at his Gary Friends thing. And I remember he's pitching, we get to buy into this NFT thing. And I thought it was the stupidest thing. I'm like, what am I buying cartoons for? And I left the webinar early, only to find about 7-8 months later, one of the guys actually sold it for like $30K or something. And I was like, I guess what Brian's really into is really big. And that's when I reconnected with you. And I'm like, I better catch up. And I spent the better part of the year kind of getting all caught up. So you did this project called NFT 365. I wanted to start with that. That is an incredible feat, especially for you, in my opinion, because the consistency was something you told me you didn't have a lot of. And that's why I took the lead on our podcast. And then I see you actually going out and nailing, which I'm blown away. Like, how did you pull that off?
Yeah, it was, I mean, for 40 years of my life, I pretty much convinced myself that, when I would talk about consistency being important, I would say, practice what I preach, not what I do. And I would just believe, it was my ADHD and consistency wasn't my bread and butter. But my brand has always been as an early adopter, press the damn button and figure out, right? Like I'm always been kind of like, not afraid to get messy, never really tried to get, be perfect or do things like that, in that direction. And I will say, like, I saw a vacant in the spot November of 21. And I said, the only way that I could see keeping up with this space was doing something every day. And then not only was I going to do a podcast every day, but I was going to buy an NFT every day. And, partially it was like, it was going to force myself to go all in, like all in, all in. But truthfully, we thought about it. We came up with the idea November 6th of 2021. November 11th, we launched. So 11/11/21, we launched. And I said pre-show, actually, I think it's like episode 3. I was like, if I make it to Christmas doing it every day, like I was gonna be excited. It was like one of those things, and like kind of worked through November, December, but I got around episode 62, 63, and I tell you what, I hit like this like feeling of like, oh man, like I can't see myself stopping doing this content. I mean, I've had 9 podcasts. This is my 8th podcast technically. And I've loved podcasting as a medium, but the growth is always, not only hard, but it's hard to track. And, we hit a million downloads by episode 90. And I was like, man, we are on to something. Cause if you added my first 7 podcasts up, I didn't have a million downloads total of all 7 on the previous podcast. So not like, like it's like one of those things where I was like, you know what, I'm gonna lean in and in this space as an early adopter, I think what I'm learning now, I made it the whole year, 365 days, and then we rolled into season 2. We're doing 3 days a week for season 2, so not every day for season 2, because I learned there's a lot of sacrifice, a lot of things I had to give up from like content promotion, content amplification, content repurposing. Right, by the time I went to repurpose something, I was already promoting the next day's episode. Like the daily content
You
was
get jumbled
crazy.
up.
Oh yeah, it was tough. But I will say the thing about it that people that I really resonated with is like they felt like even if they weren't in the space, they went on the ride with me, because if you're doing, I mean, I was recording it every day. Like I tried to batch record, but the content, like it just everything was evolving, and like the emotions of the space was evolving just so fast that I was just like, you know what? I sat down with my daughters, my 3 daughters, and I was like, girls, on daddy's weekends, I'm gonna have to record a podcast on a Saturday and Sunday. And I was like, are y'all gonna be okay with this? And of course they were like, yeah, we'll play Roblox. Like they didn't they didn't really care. But like for me, that like I've always been very, like not switched off, but like the idea of creating content on my dad weekends was just something that I was like, that's gonna be a sacrifice. But man, I'm so glad I did it. It was a roller coaster ride that I never would have imagined. And then after I finished season 1, I started in December doing an AI art piece every day for a year. And so I'm 184 days into doing an AI art piece every day. And so, I think the moral of it, I mean, it taught me lots of lessons, but one of them was like, even at 40 now, now 41, almost 42, you can learn new things about yourself. And like for me, like I was always good at like giving myself grace and understanding my own expectations, but I don't think I was willing to push myself like way outside my comfort zone, in the sense of, I mean, I got COVID twice during doing that every time. I traveled, I spoke at like 19 events during the last part of the 6 months of the podcast. I recorded 3 episodes in the hallway of airports, right? Like podcast microphone with my portable recorder. But looking back, like it taught me a lot about who I was. It also like from a brand trust perspective, which both of us care a lot about. Like, I mean, no one can say that they question if I'm going to go away or if I'm committed to something.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I put my name on it, I have proof now. And probably for, I've been a content creator now 9 years, almost 10 years. I don't think I had that kind of proof. Like maybe some people thought I was like I chase shiny objects and I love to be on the bleeding edge. But now you can't really argue about the fact that, I showed up every single day, 365 days. Not only, did a podcast, but I spent, a little over 200 grand out of my pocket to buy an NFT every day. I still hold all of those NFTs with the goal of like, I didn't want people to feel like they had to buy something to learn with me. So yeah, I appreciate the kind words, and you know me well enough to know that it was a ride and a feat. I'm not sure I would ever do it again as far as a daily podcast, but I'm really am glad I did it.
I got to honor you when when I saw that you did this, and I've got some more questions because I think there's some massive lessons for people in the journey. When it's like the content itself about NFTs, we'll get to that later. But I think that the sheer strategy that you went after your blind spot, because like you declared that to me. I'm not just saying that. You told me that was your
Yep.
blind spot, and that's why we partnered together. And then I turn around and you lean into it. What 3 lessons, if you give 3 things that you could give somebody that's embarking on intermittently doing something, and what would you give them as a lesson to go, these are the 3 things you want to focus on or lean into to accomplish something as badass as this?
So I mean, the first one was, we came up with the idea on November 6th. If I would have waited to December 1st to launch it, I would have talked myself out of it. So like the first one is like I don't think you'll ever regret putting something out there and adapting when you go. I think you will build excuses and reasons not to if you push things out too far, right? Like it's so easy to add variables and things in there. So that would be the first lesson. The second one is, remember, like one of the things that I had to remember along the whole journey was to stay true with like the reason I was doing it every day. Because imposter syndrome is one thing, but like there were some times where I'm like, oh, I have to do it. Like I originally was like, I'm gonna do all solo episodes. Well, I can tell you, I got to episode 33. I was so tired of my own voice and I missed interviewing. I love interviewing. And so I adapted, and it took me like 2 weeks because I was like, wait a second, I committed to doing this every day and I was going to do it solo. And I was like, wait a second, like, let's not, like, I think sometimes we put like these, and I will tell you, I could feel myself telling myself, well, you know what? I'm so sick of my own voice. I'm not going to adapt the content. I'm just going to give up. Like, so like in a way that was a lesson for me, was like, stay true to what success meant, but be willing to adapt and roll with like, life and how things are going. That would be definitely number two. And then I think the third lesson for me was, when you define success of something like a piece of content, I think we underestimate what it means to us as like a human, and like our own like value and our own worth. Like I mentioned the million podcast downloads, but truthfully, that never. I mean, funny enough, we hit a million. We hit 1.4 million downloads, and someone told us we hit over a million. Like I was not like, just to put it out. Like it wasn't like I was counting down to that download. I went back and was like, wait, we hit a million
You're
downloads.
focused on the outcome.
Well, and honestly, I was focused on pushing myself as a creator, as a storyteller. Like, I mean, I got rugged. I lost, my entire wallet, myself and three others, on March 22nd of 2022, for $1.9 million, the three of us got taken for, and I had to buy an NFT that day and do a podcast the next day. Right. Like, and what
I
it meant
remember
to
that.
me was like, I like owned it. Like I was emotional. And I said, like, I felt violated in a way that I didn't know a silly JPEG coming out of my wallet can make me feel violated. And I will tell you, the amount of messages still to this day where people talk about that, like that time, that week of when I got had, unfortunately clicked the button that I shouldn't have clicked. The That week, the amount of people that reached out to me and said, Brian, that happened to me 6 months ago, and I told no one because I was embarrassed. And you're a guy that has cybersecurity background. You're a guy early adopter, and the fact that you own that, like, it gave, and like that was what was like my, like, it became much more of a heart connection with my audience than about NFTs or about doing it every day or millions of downloads. And that's a lesson, like, I couldn't, the amount of money you would pay for that, like, learning, and like it really has helped me. Like, I've noticed it now, like my confidence in, like, hey, I can connect with people at a level that is beyond technology and beyond, it's not about AI art even for me, right? It's about expression and storytelling and impact in a way that I didn't know was in my wheelhouse. And so like all of those things kind of come together as like like the three. And then the other thing I'll just throw out there is like, I think the word consistency was always intimidating. And I think consistency isn't really about daily, weekly, or monthly. Consistency is about showing up when you tell people you're going to show up and communicating when you're not, right? Like, in a weirdest of ways, I realized that, I mean, it was funny, like around month 6, the amount of people that said, Brian, you sound burnt out. Like, we will forgive you. Take a day or two off. And like people were literally reaching out to me, telling me to stop being consistent because I had already proven it. And so like, don't let consistency, the desire to be consistent, make you feel like there's like this like judgment or like something that's out there. Like, allow consistency to be something that you help shape and like connect with your audience. And like anyone that's done, I mean, you've done this podcast for how long? How long have you been doing this podcast?
5 years.
5 years. I mean, dude, tip my hat. Like, I mean, like, that's consistency at a level of commitment to your audience, the content, also yourself, right? Like, showing up. And so like, I think that, to me, that's the part that I guess is the lesson, the bigger lesson. Although I was proud of it doing it daily, my appreciation for 5 years of a podcast, that consistency, is at a new height, because I like, it's not only do I understand that, but it's like, I just want to trust people that tell me they're going to show up, and they show up.
Beautiful. So taking massive action. Don't wait for perfection or you'll lose your sort of momentum in the decision making. Two was be able to adjust, but still maintain your outcome, like your what is it that you want from it.
Yep.
And 3 was be authentic. Did I capture those 3?
Yeah, I would say even go beyond be authentic, like allow what you're doing to be more than the content, I guess is what I
Mhm.
mean. Like, because in a weird way, it was therapy for me. Like the days that I was struggling, that content was more like I put out content just to hear people tell me that they appreciate it, right? Like we're not afraid to admit that. So I think that's number three is like authenticity, like is a beautiful component of it, but don't be don't shy away from the fact that although you're the creator, you could be getting more from creating the content than those that are even consuming your content, which I think is like a beautiful recipe that not many people talk about.
I'd offer you a 4th one,
Okay.
and because I know you,
Yep.
and you're the kinda guy that people can count on. Like, if I was stuck in a Mexican jail and I called you, I feel like you're the guy that would be one of the guys that would come down and get me, right?
I
You're just
would.
that guy.
Yep.
And when you stated that you had leverage over yourself, you stated NFT 365. I think you're like holding up yourself to your own standard, which was maybe a bit of leverage over yourself. Am I right?
It was. You're right. Without question.
Yeah.
And I think that also is like a there's something beautiful in that, right? Like and everyone gets motivated differently and everyone is like driven differently like to show up. I will tell you like the days I didn't want to show up, which there weren't a ton of those days. Like I actually thought there would be a lot more days of me like not wanting to create the content. But the couple days that I did, and there was probably a handful, like less than a dozen, maybe closer to a half a dozen days where I was like just not feeling it. And funny enough, it wasn't the days I had COVID. Like those are the days I was like, oh, I'll push through. But there were some days. The interesting part was like the things that you and I have preached like as marketers, right? Like just this idea of like it's not about you, it's about showing up for others. And what if this is the one day that someone finally tunes into NFT 365 and like this is the day they need to hear my voice. And that to me was such a component. So you're right, like putting that like leverage over me and also like I don't want to fail others and I'm also just so committed to standing up for what I believe in that like putting it out as NFT 365 definitely was strategic in the naming, but also probably probably purposeful in the sense of how it motivated me.
So like we're really getting a shape of this episode, you know. It's really about this the creator journey and you've mastered things. You mentioned before that you had 4 other podcasts. Are they different podcasts?
So I've done different. I mean, I've had 8 total, but right now, there's 3 that are out there that I'm doing on a regular basis.
Mhm.
One was kind of like I would say it's a episodic. I dropped them all at once. It's called Getting Started with NFTs. So it's just 12 episodes for anyone that's brand new that's never heard of NFTs that's overwhelmed by it. I just have 12 episodes that they could consume. And then I of course have NFT 365, which is now, and then I kind of just revived Press the Damn Button, which it's funny how that was been my mom. That's the keynote I've given the most in my career. It's a podcast I started 6 years ago, and it's funny how it came back around. Like post COVID, the amount of people are coming to me. I'm like, Brian, I now value the importance of telling my story, and so that one kind of is the third one that's kind of come back around.
Beautiful. And but you had some other ones before that. And I
Yep.
guess the lesson I want to kind of have you share a little bit is the journey. There's so many
Yep.
people like in my community that are new creators or they've just got their first creator offering and they're holding it like a little baby. They don't realize that sometimes it takes iterations. It takes years. It takes evolving. It takes collaborating. It takes timing. What would you share a little bit about this journey? Because I think there's so many people listening to get disheartened. They look at you and me and they go, I'll never be able to get 1 million downloads. You know, I'll never have a community like Scott has, or, you know, like publishing a book and different things like it just seems so much.
Yep.
But it started with single steps over and over again over years. This has been a long journey for us. Tell a little bit about more of this longer journey because I think it's a hope to people about just keep on keeping on.
Without question. I love that you brought that point. My first podcast, like content was 2011. But 2011 to 2013, I was showing up online in a way that I thought others wanted to hear from me. I wasn't really showing up as myself. And I know this because like I tell the story a lot now. Like November 2nd, 2013 changed for me all of my content, my brand. And I give the shout out to my mom. My mom actually called me out. We were on a phone call one day, November 2nd. And she was like, Brian, everything that you post online, even your like your photos and like all this stuff, she's like, it doesn't seem like you. And she was like, your entire life, high school, middle school, college, you walked to your own beat. You wore a hat, you wore crazy colors. I was a thespian on the baseball team and also, a hockey player, worked at a skating rink. Like I never really and my mom kind of called me out that on November 2nd, 2013. And like that day was a day I wrote in Sharpie on my mirror, be yourself, like in giant letters. And that's easy like to say, but I will tell you, I started creating content then and I changed my podcast. I had a podcast called FOMO Fans. I had a show called Social Business Hour, and all of those were not what quote unquote would be successful. But I will tell you, every one of them were the reason that NFT 365 was successful because it taught me how to be a storyteller, a creator. Like people often right now ask me, especially on like I do a lot of Twitter Spaces, and like Brian, how do you have like a story and an example for every question that's asked to you? And I was like, it's because I've practiced telling my story 5,000 times in the last many years. And those early times when I was telling my story, I didn't know what people cared about, right? And then I would listen and learn. Like people would relate with my ADHD, and ADHD is, such a big part of my brand. People would relate with me being a girl dad. People would connect with my background in cybersecurity. And like funny enough, like for the first 7 years as me as a creator, I never mentioned once that I worked for the US government in cybersecurity because I had this like weird false sense of like people would assume that I was like resting on. I had all these like weird false narratives, but like in a weird way, the fact that I spent all those years telling stories and validating myself without referencing that as like my background actually gave me a lot of like leverage like as a creator. And so to your point, like I mean, it's where I think most creators go wrong today is that when you're starting out, you try to go to where you think your audience is, not where you're most comfortable. I know that that sounds like backwards advice, but it's the secret for my success. If I would have tried to start a YouTube channel in 2013, I would still be trying to start a YouTube channel in 2023, like 10 years, because it just that, and I have a YouTube channel now, but like there's so many, like that's where my audience was, but that wasn't my like type of content, like produced and jump cuts and thumbnails and SEO and all this perfection, and like it just wasn't for me, right? Like live video was my kind of my vehicle, and so I that's probably the biggest advice I can give anyone is like find your most comfort zone for creating content and just start creating it for yourself, right? Gary Vee talks about his early wine library TV days, and like if you go watch that, it is really bad. Like his wine library videos on YouTube are bad, but like I always looked at it, I was like, oh, well, that's because it was before the internet, right? Like, oh, it was the early days of the internet. Like nobody knew what was good. I will tell you, like, you can use me as an example. Go look at some of the videos that I created in 2016. They're not great videos. They're not great content, but I was learning how to interview, learning how to tell a story, learning what my community want, talk with my audience, not at my audience. And like, I think that all of those things, like for years, right? I had a Google Plus show that I interviewed Tony Robbins on. You and I have talked about that on a past one. And Damon John. Like most people didn't even know I had that show. I did it for 3 years on Mondays at 4 o'clock, called Social Business Hour. It was not a popular show. Like it was something that I just like loved creating. I got some great guests on it. But I will tell you, I've had people, recognize me in the Web3 space as being like one of the best interviewers of people. And they're like, Brian, like, what is your secret? And I was like, dude, I've been interviewing people via video where I lose a lot of nonverbal cues I mean, the amount of interviews I've done have to be in the probably over 2000 that I've done over video. That's why I'm good. Like it's not like, I mean, and so I think for anyone that's out there, like perfection is a fairy tale is one of my, biggest, pet peeves. But the second one is like control is an illusion. Like you can only control yourself. You often can't control the output of the content and the things that you're creating. And so I would challenge anyone like, and I mean, it's crazy. Whenever we came up with the idea on November 6th for that podcast, I literally told him, I was like, because Drew, who was my business partner, I said, Drew, you realize who I am, right? Like I struggle to be commitment on every Tuesday for our current podcast. Like, what do you mean daily? And we sat there and I sat with it and I was like, but like, why have I ever tried it? Like I literally sat there and was like, I've never tried daily content. Like, why not try it? Like, what is the worst thing I could do? I made it to December. I would have celebrated and told everybody I pivoted, and I probably people would not have minded, right? And so I guess that's the piece. Like, you can give yourself permission, not as much to fail, but permission to try something and learn from it more so than anything else.
My observation, and it's just to honor the guy that I know before, is you've transformed.
Yep.
When I look at you, the confidence that you have, the certainty you have, the leadership that you're displaying. Not that you didn't have it before when we were together, but I remember when you were saying to me like, "Hey man, we've been doing this for 3 months, and I can't believe I've showed up every Tuesday to the personal branding room." And you're proud of
Right.
yourself, and you should, because you were keeping a commitment. You're following through. I think what I'm observing is that you have honored yourself in your own word, and it's given you this incredible confidence. And that's one of the backbones of Gary Vee and different people that are showing up for themselves. Is it's not perfect, but you are investing in yourself, and there's a certain energy to it, I think, or something.
Yeah, I agree. And funny thing is, most people or some people would look at it and say, is the confidence because the content was successful? And it wasn't. The confidence was because I started to achieve and push myself in ways that I didn't know were possible. And so now I ask myself, like, what else do I not know is possible? Right. Like I'm like, and I'll tell you, there's a couple of things that we're launching in my own, like, community now. We're launching a course and this mastermind. And like, I'm doing it in a way, this speaker mastermind that I'm launching, that it's my third time doing it, but I'm doing it in a way that it's the content I always wanted to consume, but I didn't think I would be the one that'd be able to create it in that format. And I've just decided, because of the confidence, to be like, you know what? I know that I can deliver this, and I know it'll be even more valuable for my community. And so, I'm leaning into that now. And, I appreciate those kind words and you
Well, what
saying
is
that,
it?
because
Tell
that
us
is
about it.
a piece. Yeah. So, Speaker Misfit Mastermind is the piece of it. So for those that are like kind of wanting to kind of level up to go from either speaking from free, or that want to be better at, their presentations, or maybe, how do you create like kind of a speaker business? I've done full time as a speaker now for a decade. It was 10 years last month that I, been doing speaking full time. And I did it kind of like the unorthodox way, right? I didn't have a book. I still don't have a book. Knock on wood. I need to knock that one out. I wasn't a past CEO. I didn't go viral or get fame. And so the speaker, Misfit Mastermind, it's, 11 live modules that we're creating and coaching. And I'm doing, in-person coaching. There's 3 like one-on-one coaching. And I'm really just pushing people to push what is possible for them as a speaker. And it's kind of what I needed from, like, I wish I had for myself 5 years ago. And it's gonna be a lot of fun. Like, I'm super excited. And like, I'll tell you, we have a couple people that have joined. We just opened it up yesterday for signups, but we had a couple people that initially joined that are speakers that like crush it. They have a amazing talk, but they want to get a second and third talk, and they want me to help kind of do it that way. And we have a couple other speakers that right now they're getting on stages I wish I could get on, but they're all free stages, right? They're not being able to get paid for it. So it's going to be fun. I'm excited for, like for me, like that idea of helping people, unleash that story that is in them, but also, kind of reach new heights. I think, Web3 NFTs have taught me a lot. And like, I really believe that it's not about the technology of the future. It's not about AI. It's not about AR, VR, all this technology. It's about the harmony of what technology and humanity can help us find, that harmony between the two. And I'm just excited to kind of help people kind of, facilitate that from the stage. We also have kind of a podcasting one that people can dive into. So lots of fun elements. And I mean, you've known me for a long while. I kind of shied away from that kind of content and that, access to my community. But I finally kind of have come kind of reverse course and excited to kind of roll those out over the next couple of months as well.
What's the confidence? It's the when you said, you weren't an author, you weren't a CEO, that what was your challenge is now your gift. Like, think of the people you're going to affect, because
Right.
my
Yep.
gut is there's tons of content about how to be a speaker, but there's a ton of different content of going, I don't feel confident. Where do I begin? And I think that's probably something that you're going to be able to speak to powerfully, which is affecting more creators than I think the tech, like the logic of it. You know what I mean?
Right. Yep. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, and and I think that's also like where we're at now. Like, people are scared of AI, and I talk a lot about AI now, and I look at AI as kind of a vehicle to unlock things that we either haven't done before or didn't even know were possible or that we wanted to accomplish, right? I know there are other things like, there's all these like productivity hacks and all these things for prompts and people are worried about their jobs, but there are so many things like, I never would have considered myself a artist ever, ever, ever would have like, and in the weirdest of ways, it's actually, while we're sitting here in 2 days. So May 18th of last year, I typed my very first AI art prompt into a computer. So 2 days, 2 days from when we're recording this. And I was like, wait, like I just took the stories that I tell on a microphone and on stage, put it into a prompt, and it created an output that had like an emotional connection for me. And I was like, what does that mean? And it took me, I went 4 months before I put anything out as like an NFT or art out there. But then I launched my first art collections. I launched 11 sets of 11 and they sold out within an hour.
They're cool.
And oh, thanks. I like love it. I like they're over my shoulder too. And like my daughters are into it. I now have, I had two pieces. Deepak Chopra just featured one of my art pieces in his gallery. I actually just got Deepak to agree to come on the podcast for me in
Congrats.
July. And that was all art. Like my AI art, I donated AI art to a mental health awareness cause that got picked up by Deepak Chopra's community that was then purchased. And like, my art now is displayed in a school in California, and they bought 5 of my pieces. And I have a collection called The Shades of ADHD, where it's all about, how I feel as someone with ADHD, how my daughter, my middle daughter has ADHD. And they actually bought 5 pieces, and it's under the neurodiversity hall. And so it's for kids to feel like they're not alone. And if their brains are like mine and they're neurodiverse, they can feel seen. And like, I say all that because a year ago, right now, like a year ago at this moment, not only was I not an artist, but I had no way to create story or impact in that medium. And now I got kids hanging up in schools and being awarded in Deepak. It was at Times Square on the billboards. And it's all thanks to AI. So for anyone that like is worried about the tech side, right? I know we talked about the content side, but if you're worried about like the tech side and what it's taking away, that's one perspective. If you can think about it from like this side, like what is it going to unlock? Like what is one, if you start to get good with some prompting in chat GPT, are you gonna be able to do things in your life, in your world that you never knew was possible? Because it's happened to me, and it's been great for my own mental health. Like if I'm overwhelmed or feeling down, I go create art. Not for anyone else, not to sell, but I just create this art. And I never had that outlet. 41 years of my life, never had that outlet. And it's another new venture. And in a weird way, the podcast also helped with that, right? The daily podcast, because then I was like, you know what? I 40 years of my life, I didn't think I could be consistent. I proved myself wrong there. 41 years of my life, I didn't think I was an artist. Well, let's see if I can prove myself wrong there. And sure enough, it's happening again. So I think that should hopefully inspire anyone that's out there that's questioning that, because it's been a wild ride.
Oh, it's beautiful to watch. It's like you got this multi-dimension, you got the sound, now you got the art. Your personal brand is like really evolving. And, this AI discussion is super interesting because one of the things I'm observing for the future I see is having, people who don't know they're creators, they don't identify as creators, are becoming creators. They just didn't even realize it. And I think the reason why is the tools with rules and these different techniques and things you had to learn from Final Cut to, working with Adobe prevented people. And so it required people around you to execute your vision. And now I think we're about to see this explosion of the solopreneur where one person can do what 15 people used to do and run a business and run an audience and create something meaningful for themselves. And this is kind of what I'm seeing. I'm curious what you're seeing in
Yep.
terms of we'll get into AI, but I'm just thinking about the concept of the creator being more powerful than ever.
Yeah, if we would have done this interview when you and I were doing Clubhouse, right? Like I wasn't attracted to crypto, and I wasn't really attracted to NFTs. I was attracted to the creator economy. I was really excited about this like monetization where we could lift each other up. Rising tide lifts all boats. And one of my weaknesses and I know this for a fact, is my ability to sell to B2C. Like I am a B2B. I've always been like I go to a company, they hire me to speak at an event. I have a podcast, I go to a company to sponsor that event, like or my podcast. That was always like my sweet spot, right? And I always recognize like in myself in that side. And so when I saw the creator economy and I launched my ADHD coin, March of 21, or January of 20
That was on the
21.
Rally Network, right?
Yeah, it was on the rally, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, which unfortunately is no longer in existence. But it was one of my most it was a project that meant so much to me as a creator, because if you like, for anyone that was part of that community that held the ADHD coin, we were all rising together, right, in this idea of that creator economy. And to your point, like I like shunned away from being considered a creator for many, many years, because I looked at a creator and like an artist and a musician, and like I was like, I'm a storyteller, I like to talk and I get on stage, right? Like, and I can create video, but like, and the weird part about that is like that self-labeling. Like if that's where I love, like, I believe every person has a story to tell, and every person has experiences and perspective that no one else has. And that a lot, that is what a creator, like, that's the magic recipe that a creator needs. And when we own that, it doesn't matter if you call yourself a creator or call myself an artist. Like, I mean, I had two people track me down at an event a couple weeks ago, and they're like, Brian, I never knew of you, never heard of you. I found your art, someone shared it. I assumed you were an artist. They're like, can I get a picture with you holding up a picture? Like, they have my art hanging above their sofa. And I was like, oh my God, like, imagine how many people don't identify as a creator that are going to be able to lean into that, and also lean into it to make a living, but not even just make a living, but to reward your community along with it, right? And it's not about crypto. It's about blockchain. The technology of the blockchain is the magic recipe of this whole thing. It's allowing us to change what does it mean to have digital ownership. And I'll just give a little tangent on this real quick. Is that I'm a futurist, right? Like, I love bleeding edge. I try everything, right? I was on Clubhouse, way early. I was on, NFTs way early. Like, here's where I have to say on this piece of it is that what the blockchain is allowing us to do is it's allowing us to provide ownership on 50% of our lives. I do not believe that in the future we are going to be more connected, have more device time. I believe right now we spend about 50% of our time on our devices or connected, and 50% not, right? And I believe that's going to be the future. I don't believe, like, when we hear metaverse, people are like, "Oh my God, I'm not going to live in my headset." No, I agree. But there are things that we do and consume digitally right now that we've had no ownership on. Like, if I told you, Scott, what do you own in your house, right? You own surfboards, you own your house, your car, your refrigerator, like tangible. But I asked you, what do you own digitally where you spend 50% of your life? Like, there's not very many things, like, so we've been missing a key component to, like, community and creator kind of expression, and it's ownership. And that's why, for me, that's why, like, if you want to hear me get passionate about NFTs, has nothing to do with Bored Ape, has nothing to do with about a money that someone has. It has everything to do with giving someone ownership with what they put out to the blockchain. Like, how cool is it 40 years from now, my daughters can look on the blockchain and see that daddy's art was put into Deepak Chopra's collection. Like, it's immutable. It's on the blockchain. It can never be deleted. It can never be edited. It is there forever. And like, that is the technology that excites me for everything. So like, every coach that's listening, every person that has like a side hustle, like, you've never had a way to say like, hey, I'm the first to create, like, you do amazing logos and design, Scott. You're the king on that side. But let's face it, how many times have other people said, oh, I created that logo first, or I put that brand out, or I had that name first? And like, figuring out who was first in a digital world for the last 10 years is damn near impossible, right? Like, I mean, because people can manufacture dates, you can schedule things back. Like, I could launch a podcast today and say it was dated, 2005. I just changed the date and it looks like it was launched there. But on the blockchain, that technology that I'm talking about, it's immutable. Like, when something is done, if you think of it as like it's a Excel spreadsheet ledger in concrete, that once something is written in that little block, the concrete hardens and it can never be edited. And the beauty of that for someone like that is designers, that once you design something and put something out there and you have it on the blockchain, there's no disputing, there's no arguing, there's no taking back. It is yours. It says on this date, it was created from this hash, and here's where it lives. And to me, that permanence in this digital world has been such a missing thing for creators. And I think that is like the weird segue back. Like, the blockchain is going to unlock ownership digitally, and creators can be able to step into their greatness and start putting out like things that we just didn't know were possible.
Love it. I call, where I've been leaning into the language of entrepreneur sovereignty. It's
Yes.
like
Ooh, I
the
like that.
looking for technology and things that empower that. And frankly, it's actually the topic of my next book I'm already writing, called Title Shift, that we're leaving the age of attention, where we're chasing stuff to get more attention, follows, likes, and an audience, and moving into an age of trust where
Yes.
it no longer is required. It's based on automatic trust with blockchain, right? You don't need a
Yep.
lawyer to be able to do land titling. Um, you just it's in trust. When the lawyer has, but with blockchain, it just shifts. I think that that transparency is really exciting. I think it's a lot of people are tripped up because they kind of put together the NFT thing and some of the stuff that's going on with Web3 that's really, um, arguably unethical. But I'd say that some of the stuff that's they thought was in the blockchain, that's what I thought, is not technically on the blockchain. Like a rally was on the
Yep.
blockchain, but it was centrally controlled. And I think that's this shift over. Am I right in saying that? That was the
Nope.
accurate
I
depiction?
I if I could ever go back and do it again, I will never create in the Web3 space without owning the contract on the blockchain. So
And that's
it
what
technically
happened to
wasn't
me.
as much sense. Yep. And that's the and let's face it, that's what every platform has done for us, right? Like if you've grown an audience on Instagram or LinkedIn, you've been doing it for those platforms. And those platforms have owned our data, our content, our information. And so weirdly, just because the blockchain exists doesn't mean people aren't going to take that gray area and manipulate it, right? Like I like to say, like every technology since the beginning of time, bad people have done bad stuff with it, and you can't fix stupid with any of this technology, right? Stupid is always going to exist. But the interesting part about it is the technology as it and it's way, I mean, I can't even stress how easy it is for me to create an art piece today compared to even 1 year ago and sell it to you, right? Like to put it out there on the blockchain. I can put it on there. You can buy it with a credit card. You don't have to have a wallet. You don't have to know crypto. You don't have to know blockchain. And you could buy a piece of my art and you could know that you're the only one that owns it and it's one of one without you having to know any of these other things. A year ago, I would have had to walk you through 19 different steps.
Mhm.
And just think about that in 1 year, how far we've come. I mean, I was at Starbucks this past weekend, and I have the Starbucks NFT, and I'm part of their ecosystem as a holder, just as a holder. And I scanned my pass at my app at the Starbucks, and it unlocked my. I had a certain amount of trips to go to a Starbucks, and I unlocked an NFT that dropped in my wallet. And with that NFT, every week for the month of May, I get a free drink at Starbucks that was like voted on in the community. And it was so crazy to me that like I looked at my daughter, slid it across and said, "Look, Daddy's getting rewarded for Starbucks and I own this." And I was like, "You know what? I'm going to send it to a friend of mine." And like that feeling of ownership, because rewards aren't new, right? We've all got rewards from airlines and hotels, but I've never owned them. Like, it's always been like, "Oh, I have to ask Southwest Airlines to transfer my points." Like, wait a second, didn't I earn them? Aren't they mine? And in this case, that ownership changes it, right? So if I give you ownership in what we're doing, Scott, and you can sell that if you're no longer into, like, I love the gym membership idea, right? Like, I think every gym will have one. Like, let's just say if every gym in your area had 1,000 gym NFTs, and that's the total amount of people they could have in their gym as membership. The way that the trust that you mentioned would be facilitated was if you went to the gym's website and there was 500 of the 1,000 NFTs for sale for membership, you're gonna be like, I don't think that gym delivers on what they promised, right? And you go to the other gym that has 997 of them that are taken, and there's only 3 available for sale. You're like, man, people are happy with what they delivered. Wait, it's trust. You can trust the delivery of a product and service, and like we've lost that commitment. And people like to blame millennials for like loss of loyalty. No, it's just technology and the pace of digital change, it reset what trust was meaning, and we just forgot how important and how much of a priority trust in like people, trust in places, trust in brands, trust in experiences. And I think that's where we're moving towards. And I'm with you. I love that that's your next book, because I think that's such a it's a key component of it, and it's going to change every aspect of our lives. When you buy your next car, right? Even when you buy a car from somebody on Craigslist or you buy a car from your neighbor, you're hoping it's not a lemon. You're hoping that they went and got the oil changes. Well, guess what? Very soon, all of that will be on the blockchain, and they'll just be able to show you their wallet and say, "This is the car's title that I own. This is the services that I provided to it." And the trust is just it's implied. It's there forever. And like we're gonna live in a world where that trust is going to allow a lot more, not only sovereignty, but a lot more people to come to the table that unfortunately, minorities and LGBTQ plus that have been not only marginalized, but have the way the economy has been designed has kind of forced them to never have a chance. this removal and new delivery of trust, I believe, resets that entire bar. So I think the people that are scared right now, like that should be scared, is if you sell unicorns, rainbows, and BS. If you've never been one that required to deliver trust over a long time and you could just jump from one scam to the other, you should be scared to death right now. Everyone
Totally.
else, if you are a good person doing good stuff that delivers on what you have, you communicate, and you are trustworthy, we are resetting a lot of this digital landscape to empower you. And for the rest of you, either change or about to get run over.
Love it. It's true though. That's what I'm like saying. I'm like, lean into where the puck is going, not where it is.
Yep.
Build more trust. What can you do to create? Like, I mean, Don Peppers talks about extreme trust. Extreme trust is what you're saying, which is like Apple. I went to buy another song and it said, "Wait a minute, I'm not going to charge you. You already bought it. Do you want to buy it?" They were doing that to build trust. So now I don't have to worry about buying something like, did I buy it? And they could make billions of dollars on people's missteps. And that's just an example, I think, of this. Now, my question for you is, because you and I always do this from the past, I'm going to put a new idea together and see what you think. Is
Okay.
there's this book by David Ellison. He did the research around the death of demographics. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that.
No, I'm not.
And he did this research, which is basically saying demographics is dead. The ability to marketing and advertising using um, archaic ways of identifying people, that the real, at the source of it is values, is that people buy based on values. And then the story I'll share is like what you and I would probably appreciate. I go into a skateboard shop. I still go to skateboard shops, but I'm 50 years old, overweight, and skateboard in the mailbox. But you would never target an ad to me. But
Right.
I'm exactly the type of person that shares in a community. When I'm in there, I'm a little drawn. The guy that's 12 years old, instantly he and I are connected. I will chat about shit, right? Like he'll be like, "Oh, I see an old Kryptonics commercial or sticker or something," right? Like that's old school. So what he's suggesting is that we're entering into this values economy that businesses and people want more with their money. If they're buying an NFT that's now giving to a charity around ADHD, it's almost more important. In fact, Patagonia, people will step over other brands, pay 30% more because the brand has more meaning and it's aiming to do more. So I'm wondering if this trust and values coming together with this blockchain is such an exciting future because now you can attribute, I'm going to do good in the world. This is what I value. These communities you mentioned, that to me is people want to support and more with their money than just what they're buying. What's sort of your take on this? Because you're really on the cusp of leading edge.
So I think like the number one, my favorite use case right now for NFTs is nonprofits. And the reason I say that is I started to talk with nonprofits and I said, what are the things that's missing, right? Like, cause like if you think about it, when I interviewed the team at Starbucks about like why did Starbucks deploy NFTs? I mean, you have the number one royal rewards app in the United States. Like 30 million users use the Starbucks rewards app. Like, why the hell do you need NFTs? Their answer was really beautiful. They said, hey, we have done an amazing job of connecting one to many in a transactional relationship. But we have done a horrible job at connecting coffee drinkers with coffee drinkers and understanding our core people beyond even what they drink. And I was like, oh my gosh, like think about that, right? Like, and it's the whole thing, like, the keynote I gave for the longest time was called Millennial Mindset, right? And I always said it's not the age you were born, but it's your mindset. And it was because like how ridiculous is that we were doing demographic and targeting based on one variable that nobody can control. Like nobody ever has said, picked out what year they were born, right? No one's even able to decide what generation you were born into. Yet we love to like bucket people in there, but not even generations, right? Like, even geography. Like I will tell you, like I live in Northern Virginia. And if you drove down the road where I live on, it is a bunch of Trump flags. Then there's a bunch of rainbow flags. And if you summed up in my area, you would target it one or the other, right? You wouldn't recognize how unique this environment is, and how cool in a interesting way that on Saturday mornings that we have a Black Lives Matter parade that is out here that I take my daughters to, and both of these groups show up there, right? Like, and so like there and like we have like a common bond in these like weird elements, and I think to your point, like that's what's been missing, and especially from a data digital perspective, right? And the hardest part for this is, and the reason I connected with some nonprofits is I said like what's missing from like the nonprofit donor area, and they said, Brian, here's the thing: is that like our donors give because they love to give and they believe in what we're doing, but so many of them would love to connect with other donors that donate on the same level and the same impact as them, and they would probably continue to donate even more if there was a way for people to see that, but not be like a braggadocious way, right? Because these donors don't want to say that they're donating for that. And I was like, well, how cool is it be that everything that we do, right? Like, this is one of my favorite stats to put out there, right? There was a recent study, it was done earlier this year. 81% of the people that list Harvard as the school they went to on LinkedIn did not attend Harvard. 81%. How crazy is this? This is even take it a step further. 2015, the amount of people say they graduated from Harvard in 2015 is 4 times greater than the graduating class of Harvard. Like, there's so like this idea of like, how do we, because like it goes both ways, right? There are people that fake it till they make it and put that stuff online. But then what that does is, if the good people, there's like lack of trust. Like, how do I know your interests? Because like, did you just click on the wrong thing on Facebook one time and all of a sudden you're targeted? Because like, I mean, I've heard like like a good friend of mine, like her 13-year-old daughter was clicking on a bunch of clicked on a couple ads that had to do with, this cute little baby outfit that she wanted to get her niece. And all of a sudden she was getting targeted with pregnancy tests and things that were like, wait a second, that your 13-year-old, no, hold, like what, we missed that. Right. And I think that a lot of that was just the way that the data had got out of control. And the hardest part was, I think we've known this for many years. We just didn't have a solution to take back ownership of our data. And I believe in the very near future, like let's just say 5 years from now, every person's gonna have a wallet. It's gonna look like our Apple wallet that is on our phone, right? It's going to feel like that. And you're gonna have your diploma, you're gonna have your certifications, you're gonna have your driver's license, your passport, your insurance. All of that's gonna be stored, and you, because it's yours, are gonna decide who you share it with and when or why. And it's going to be up to brands to provide you an experience and so much value that you'd be willing to expose that. Because we know, based on track record in marketing, there are plenty of people that I will give my data all day long to brands that respect my data and use it to provide better experiences. Like that, most of us would. The problem is like we weren't sure if they were selling it, if they were retargeting it, or if they were using it like, ill will, or if I didn't have control of where or when, right? How many people have things in their background or their lives? Like even you brought up the skateboarding, right? Like I love that aspect, right? Like there are so many things for me that make up who I am that like they don't really show up online, but I kind of wish they had a way to kind of like recognize, like I'm a Taylor Swift super fan. Like I am a Swiftie, loud and proud. And it's so funny because like I'm not the I'm not the target demographic or the exact, like view, like, and people are like, oh, it's because you have daughters. No, like I have to like force my daughters to listen to Taylor Swift. Like it goes the other way around. And that's like the beauty, I think, of where we've come as a society, is recognizing how, how unique yet similar we are. But that idea of targeting demographics or targeting persona or even targeting based on only voluntary actions, right? Like we should understand how much data and how many exciting things are out there. And, and it's where like, I mean, some of my biggest sponsors of my podcast connect with me because they had someone in their family that had ADHD. They reached out and asked me for some advice on
Shared
ADHD.
values.
We connected. And then later on, they're like, wait a second, you have a podcast? Wait, that's what you have trust with my audience that I want to reach. Can I sponsor? And people are like, wait, like, I'm like, yeah, you don't realize those pieces. So I'm 100% with this idea that, demographics are moving away and we're going to this idea of ownership of our data. It's going to be wild because I think we've definitely learned where data can be used poorly, but we've never actually taken ownership of our data and being like, oh, when I go into this restaurant, I love this restaurant. I want them to know all of my buying habits because I want people to sponsor inside of this restaurant because they get to know me better, right? Like imagine like how cool that will be, that we'll be able to empower the businesses and brands that take care of us. Like I think this is, and maybe I'm a little bit, you know, optimistic on like the true adoption of it, but I'm excited for what it means for all of us.
That's why you and I connect. We both believe, I mean, my tagline, transferring business as usual into business as beautiful. I have a very optimistic point of view of where this is all going.
Yep.
Most people are feeling a little bit, I think we're going to go through some tough times first, but it requires that for us to have a response to create something we no longer like all the data breaches and things that we've been hearing about is what's creating it's a push towards this more humanized world where we have control, which I think is, quite beautiful. And if I think about community, so you've kind of evolved, we look at businesses have audiences and customers, and we're shifting into community and humans and individualization and sovereignty. If I think of that shift, and I can't not talk about community with you and the importance of it. I just did an interview with Mark, who wrote the book Belong to the Brand. And, the idea that community is the last great strategy. And I'm curious what is your take on community? What is your definition of community versus audience?
So yeah, so my definition, and I think both of them are important. I think we have to always clarify that like audience and community are both important, right? Like not having an audience makes pretty much growing a community damn near impossible, right?
Mhm.
Like if you can't reach people, so like I hate when people throw like one out. It's like wait a second, no, like we have to understand like both of them have
Purist.
value.
Yeah.
But yeah, but I look at community as it's the difference for community, and I like to do it like community versus a network because I also think a network is important, but community is different. Community is about people coming together around a shared purpose and a common passion for an outcome, right? So the purpose is what joins us, right? That is our joining light, and the way that you can truly know the difference between like oftentimes a community and a network is that when people are brought into a network, it's about the individuals that brought them in and the individuals that are a part of it. And if one or two individuals leave a network, oftentimes the residual effects of that are ridiculous, right? They just because people are like, oh, the people that I brought in with, like that's my people. I'm no longer associated. A community, it's about that shared purpose, that common passion. But I think the piece of this that's important to also kind of calculate is that passion for an outcome, right? If for a community to be successful, we all have to have a shared passion for that outcome, which means that we all have to believe that there's certain things that we need to do to take action. And that's why like when some people get mixed up with like a cult, they say like, cults are like there are aspects of a cult that we should all learn from for what it truly means to incite people around a shared purpose and passion, right? Like,
Yeah, especially if you're
now
moving in the same direction. Um,
correct. And
I
and
think I wrote
that's
the
where a
book,
lot
it's
of them
called
get it wrong.
Groundswell.
Yeah, it sounds like a groundswell. It does. That sounds like that piece of it. But I will also say the community piece of this that is also so vital is that I think goes twofold. It's really we want to be seen and heard, and we want to connect with people, and we want to like at our core as humans. Like I think, and I think I'm 42. I'll be turning 42 next month. It's really hard to make friends as adults, right? It's really hard to find people that you like align with and that you can believe with and that you share something with. And especially for us, like if you work from home, like I
And
travel, I
trust.
work from home. Yeah, and trust, right? Like, yeah, I have to have all those things, right? Like, heaven forbid all those moving parts kind of coming together. But I will say like where I'm excited probably most about community is like I do believe that the future of business is community. Like I believe that every aspect of what we do. I mean, why would Starbucks, who has 30 million people in a rewards app, start prioritizing this idea of NFTs and creating these communities? It's because they realize that having a transactional relationship with a notification on an app is only as good as those notifications are turned on and that app is installed. But if you connect and help people connect with people, and it's why I mean when like Tony Robbins, it's when those communities of people that the reason that they're so vibrant and people are so passionate about them, it has so much more to do than just Tony Robbins or your local church or like it is so much more to do. It's like, wow, I found my people and together we are going to accomplish something. And let's face it, digitally, it's been hard to find that. It's been really hard to
Mhm.
find that. And the beautiful thing is the return of ownership, the prioritization of trust are going to make it a lot easier for us to deliver community over the digital landscape. And we're just going to take us, it's just going to take us a little while to get like the tech to be aligned with the trust. And then also to weed through the media and the haters and like so much of people, like I just challenge anyone that when you're listening to someone talk about technology, AI, any of this, anything that seems foreign to you, ask yourself about like what is the lens that they're providing their perspective, because there are a lot of smart people that are providing really piss poor perspectives because they're tired of learning new things and they're burnt out on the hamster wheel that they're on. And they're using the technology, bashing the technology as like the vehicle for them to like give themselves a break. Like so much, like if you look at the banks that just failed, the banks, if those banks were using blockchain, they would not have failed. They failed because of human greed and the lack of trust due diligence, right? Like people weren't doing their due diligence. If FTX or Silicon Valley Bank, the banks that most recently just made the big news, if we had transparent access and all of that was on the blockchain where we could trust where the money was, where things were sent, it changes everything, right? Like,
Hmm.
and that brings communities around. And so I think right now it's unfortunate because the aspect of community that can sometimes feel like fluff, if you see Starbucks adapting at that core, like, do you feel like you have a better relationship with your customers than Starbucks? I'm going to guess, I mean, maybe a handful of companies could say yes. If Starbucks is making it a priority because they see community as the future, I think every brand, every business has to make that same priority.
Beautiful. I call it my book. I call it Move, Change, Transform. So think of your Black Lives Matter, right? It's a movement,
Yep.
but it's that's the start. That's the momentum, right? It's the movement. That's only committed to take action. That's the transactions. That's quite honestly, that's what any business has to have that to do that. But then there's the
Right.
next change, which is change. Like Black Lives Matter is aiming to change behavior, right?
Right.
And when you change from one brand to another, you change who you are. You're now you're kind of open to sharing it, word of mouth, right? So now that's where Starbucks is doing. They're
Yep.
changing the way that your loyalty rewards are happening, where you can actually share with others. But the next stage is transform, where you're compelled that's where the Tony Robbins is like what the
Yep.
goal for Black Lives Matter isn't to change, is to actually
Right.
transform the world. It's like it really, if you think about the stages, that's a groundswell, that's a growth loop, right? And so
Right.
this technology on the blockchain, I think it's enabling towards this end where transformation can occur because you can trust it completely. You can be in a community of trust, which allows you to kind of like that's why these great communities or cults exist because they're communities of people moving in the same direction, and they trust one another and they're making big changes, transforming things.
Without question.
So super fans, you and I share a super fan. His name was Chad Zowazarski. I think I pronounced it. Do
Okay.
you remember him?
Yep. Yep.
You run his podcast called Dark Starts,
I
the
was.
snowboarding one. And
Yes.
when I was launching my community, my inner circle, I was reaching out to him over and again. And I never heard from him, and he was, like, he was my number 1 fan, and he was I think this is weird because you and I shared he heard you on my podcast.
Yep.
He was relentless. "I want please get me on his podcast." And remember I advocated to go, "This guy's great," and you had
Yep.
him on or he was on your podcast. Anyways, I just found out, just so you know, a week ago that he had passed away, and I
Oh,
was
no
like,
way.
I didn't even know. And but he was felt. Like, I was like, "Oh my gosh," and when I heard this is an
Oh.
example of, like, where I'm like, "It really gutted me." This guy was like, every show, he was says it was sponsored by Groundswell, even though I never sponsored it. He's like, "Oh, I'm giving you sponsorship." And, like, that's the kind of fan he was.
Oh, man.
But
Yeah.
it just shows that, you know, there's something different when you build community. He wasn't a customer. He wasn't and I wanna honor him in this episode. In this episode, I wanted to make
Oh.
this a memory of him, of the super fan that is not forgotten. It's like he's gonna somehow I'm gonna enshrine him in my community because he was the keenest guy. He just took every piece of advice I ever got and listened to every episode, and he would send me notes, and I'm like, just such a great student, and he was a great student of he was shaping his business around your teaching as well. So anyways, I thought you should know that.
Oh, man, and I tell you what, I owe him a lot, because there was, I mentioned there's a couple times where I was frustrated and unsure if I should, make a podcast episode. Chad was one of those people that I thought of, and I said, you know what? What if there's another Chad that's listening that I could impact? And so like there's a lot of people that have been impacted because of his and I think that's also a great lesson in like letting creators know that they impact you. Like you have no idea how much when people ask me like, how can I be like get into this creator world? I'm like, the people that you consume. if someone makes a great Facebook post, if you watch something on Instagram or YouTube, or even like I will tell you, like I tweeted out the first, I guess the second week that Ashton Kutcher, from Fame, he had his Armchair Expert, which is my favorite podcast. I tweeted out with like just a, "Hey Ashton, I loved your podcast. These were a bunch of things that I was blown away by." He sent me a message back, and he was like, "Man, I've been wondering if this connects with people outside of like my AA loop." That he was, he's like, I am. He was like, and so much so he sent me a shirt like just to say thank you, and I like own that because like you never know who needs to hear that and how it'll impact others. And like Chad, I'm so sorry to hear that he passed away, but I will say his impact leads on, and it leads on from a super fan perspective on both of us. And it's a beautiful lesson for us all. And I think I think when we're done recording here, I probably will reach out to a couple of creators that I just need to say thank you to them, in his honor as well, because I think that's really profound. And man, that's yeah, wow. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, and doing this in honor of him, and it's also connecting great people with great people, right? Like, I think that's why we do this, right, Scott? It's like, you know, part of what, when it comes down to it, right? Like that trust, like we didn't have to tell like anyone that Chad would talk to about either one of us, they didn't have to like ask if we were trustworthy. Chad conveying it from the third party made us establish trust vehicles from day one. And you can't pay for that. You can't, and every brand, every business, every leader, every creator, every entrepreneur should be thinking about that, right? Like who are your stewards of trust like in your world, and those super fans that you have. And we probably, I'm sad that I probably didn't reach out and be able to hear this from us, like verbatim. But I know that like knowing that his impact will continue to live on, I think is a pretty amazing feeling.
It's a lesson for me is, you know, you never know, if somebody, whether they physically leave the world or just leave your community, and you could have just, again, acknowledged them and let them know that as a creator, even for being so, like he used to send me notes going, "When's your next podcast coming out?" Like,
Yeah,
he's like, it's been like weeks. Like, I'd be like, I have never had anybody like that's really like just anticipating. And for me, I look at this as going, I'm gonna have Chad enshrined in the strategy of how to honor super fans, because that's your groundswell. That's the energy of the
yeah,
compelled to tell other people, because he was compelled to tell anyone that listened about me and you. And let's just leave it at that. I think that's what we
yeah,
live for, is that we change somebody where they are willing to tell anyone to listen about what we do. And so I want to honor the super fans.
for sure. Love that.
Awesome. Well, thanks again. Where can everybody follow you?
Yeah, so I'm so iSocial Fans everywhere with the Z. So iSocial Fans on every social network. That's been my brand now for a decade. Of course, I go more by Fanzo in Web3. Like I've had to clarify that a couple times. Where and funny enough, like I grew up and there was a bunch of Brian's in my school, so I was always just known as Fanzo, and even though my first name being Brian. But brianfanzo.com is my speaker website, but everything else is iSocial Fans. And NFT 365 is in every single podcasting app that is out there. And I will say we're on YouTube as well. I also, when I was doing the daily content, I was very aware. Like one of the sticky notes that I had on my screen for that entire year was the idea of creating content from an evergreen perspective, right? Where I can promise you can go listen to episode 30 today, and I might highlight a couple of things that happened at that date when things were going on, but the premise and the actual bulk of that episode is supposed to, for me, it was to live on. I didn't want to do a daily podcast that was not worthy for people to listen to. And I'll tell you right now, we're averaging about 300 downloads per old episode a month, which to me is just so cool to see. So for anyone that's like interested in any of the things I talked about, like in this like realm, just check out the podcast. You don't have to listen to every episode. I mean, there's a lot of I mean, this episode lasted a long while. I mean, my average podcast episode is like 42 minutes because I don't know how to answer things short, and I love to talk. But yeah, thanks so much for having me on, Scott. It's always a pleasure. I'm glad we caught up. I know we've been kind of missing each other, and both we were full steam ahead every week together, and then kind of we're working on our own worlds. Congrats on the book and the upcoming book as well. And yeah, excited for more to come for sure.
Thanks again for being on the show. And everyone listening, mahalo. I really appreciate you. And Chad, big shout out to wherever you are. You're dropping POW, an untracked line somewhere. And, I just encourage you, if you really want to connect with me more, I would just look at my community. It's groundswellinacircle.com and join the community. There's a free area there and just take a look around. And that's it. Okay, until next time, guys, mahalo.